Zed in Life is brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
And live from Brussels, it's ZN Live. ZN Live. I'm very excited to have you on episode 406. I'm Phil Weiss, ZN CEO and founder. And on this very special episode number 406, pre-Christmas episode, last episode before Christmas, 2024, we have a special guest, Michiel Van Hulten, who is an experienced Brussels hand who's been working across a range of different things. He's also an EU influencer, but he's worked in politics, policy, advocacy. He's had an academic background from LSE to the College of Europe, and he's worked, he was a former member of the European Parliament, chair of the Dutch Labour Party, has held leadership roles in various organizations, including Transparency International EU and Vote Watch Europe. But more recently, Michiel has been very active on Blue Sky following his migration from X. So, Michiel, welcome to the show, and tell us a bit about your journey from X to Blue Sky, or from Twitter to Blue Sky, whatever you prefer to call it.
Yes, I think I still refer to it as Twitter, but maybe that's because I miss it so much. But I left Twitter about 2 years ago, which is when Musk took over the site, and he made it very clear that he was going to take things in a very different direction. And when he started firing people around the world with no notice, I just didn't feel that that's the kind of platform I wanted to be active on. And of course, then we were in the wilderness for a long time, at least I was. And I basically managed to kick the social media habit, which was certainly in itself probably not a bad idea, and certainly made my family much happier. But I really missed this environment that Twitter had created, in which we could, discuss current affairs and politics and the big issues of the day with each other, with a range of people that you know well and a range of people that you know less well. Which I thought was really enriching and useful from a personal perspective, but also professionally. And so I signed up for Blue Sky as soon as it started handing out access codes, and became active as soon as I was admitted. And then what we've seen with Blue Sky, of course, is that it had a very slow start, deliberately, because they wanted to get things right. But each time there was a major event involving Twitter/X, and Musk, behaving increasingly erratically, becoming more right-wing, finally going full Trump, you could see that there were huge numbers of people migrating to Blue Sky. And I think that the American elections really were, in a way, the watershed moment, because at that point, there really was critical mass on Blue Sky. People who really no longer wanted to be on X felt it was too polluted with disinformation, too much a tool for Musk himself personally. And so that's, I think, how we are where we are today.
Now, I mean, when you left X, or when you planned to leave X and I guess social media, you said, have you been exploring Mastodon and Threads and LinkedIn, or did you just go straight to Blue Sky and stay there? What is your sense of the landscape right now?
Yes, no, absolutely. I did go on to Mastodon, which I thought was, which I think still is a great tool, but I think for very limited purposes. And it's also, and I know the big Mastodon fans don't like people saying this, but I think it's a bit techy, a bit nerdy. The interface isn't as comfortable as as intuitive as the old Twitter one, the current Blue Sky one. And so there's a really high barrier to access, I think, for many people. LinkedIn I use as well, but I use it mainly to post articles, obviously to post on professional development. And you can really feel on LinkedIn that there isn't this encouragement of active engagement that there is on other platforms. So LinkedIn feels too one-directional for me to be useful as a platform from debate, which is really debate and information, which is really what I'm looking for. And one of the things about Blue Sky is that, for instance, when the attempted coup d'état in South Korea happened, you could immediately find all the important voices from the ground who were telling you minute by minute what was going on. There were reliable voices doing that, and that kind of interaction is something that used to exist on Twitter and now is back exists on Blue Sky.
Did you try out Threads at all? Did you feel interested in that experiment?
I did sign up to Threads as well when it came out, and when it first was launched, of course, with the link to Facebook, Instagram, there was this immediate huge number of followers or users that made it viable. But in my view, Facebook, Meta have been so depoliticized in their content that actually, if you're looking for political discussion and political developments, then it's not that useful. So I can imagine that those tools are useful, particularly from the point of view of personal relations, social relations, but not if you want to use it on a professional basis.
Yeah, no, very interesting. I, like you, were on Blue Sky, but I wasn't very active. I was just observing as part of our kind of, trying to understand the changes of the media landscape. One thing I think that was very interesting is that immediately after the election, there was a massive surge of switch over from X to Blue Sky, and also I think some engagement. And one of the things I think that was particularly effective is the starter packs. Now you have decided to spend time creating those starter packs, which I think is a great entry point. So can you tell us, what is a starter pack, and how many starter packs have you created, and how do you feel it helps to navigate into the world of Blue Sky?
Yes, absolutely. I think starter packs are an absolutely genius idea, and probably without starter packs, Blue Sky would not be where it is today. So the idea is very simple. You can create lists of users that you recommend following, or that that belong to a certain category that belongs together, and then you can share that list with your own followers, and they can then, with a single click of a button, follow all the people on that list. And I started doing that in a way for very self-interested reasons, which is that I wanted to promote engagement in Brussels on Blue Sky, because I wanted to help recreate that old Twitter vibe. And so creating starter packs, I felt, was a great way to do that. So I did one first for journalists and media. So I've got a starter pack for EU bubble journalists and media, which has 150, which is the maximum names on it. I've also done now, in fact, I just published one today with MEPs in the new parliament, another 150 names, which is about the number that are active on Blue Sky right now, as far as at least I can tell, and the sources that I used have revealed. And I also posted one with the members of the European Commission, plus UCO President, European Council President, who is now also on Blue Sky. There's 9 European commissioners who are on Blue Sky, who are active there. Of course, that's only 1/3 of the commission, but it's a good start. And the reason I think those are important is because these are precisely the kind of people that need to be on there and need to be interacting with each other in order to make the platform relevant.
Yeah, and thank you for doing that, because I joined, well, when I reactivated my account, or at least started to engage more, it was very useful to go there, and you do get to follow people. And because I think the algorithm of Blue Sky is designed differently, so you can have the followers or what people that follow you, that you're following and tweeting. So it kind of gives you, I would say, better quality control, rather than letting Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk decide, or the Chinese government decide what you're going to see on different platforms. So what is your sense of where Blue Sky is right now? You've been obviously tracking all these groups of people. Do you see a kind of, I mean, we've seen a surge in maybe account creation. How about engagement? And do you feel it's getting to the right people in the bubble to create a kind of viable space?
Yes, on engagement, people who are still active on Twitter / X are saying on Blue Sky that they're getting much more engagement on Blue Sky for the same tweets, the same skeets as they were as they are on Twitter. Now I can't verify that because I've left X, so I can't compare that. But certainly the word on the street, if you like, is that engagement is much higher on Blue Sky. I think there was a big surge also in Brussels after the US elections. Big surge in sign-ups, in people following, and obviously in posting. I think that's kind of leveled off. I think the interest has dropped off a little bit, and I think what's really needed in Brussels for it to finally acquire its place in the pantheon of the great social media platforms and conversation tools is for the EU institutions to take it seriously and post all of their content on there, possibly as well as on other platforms, but certainly also on Blue Sky. And I'm a bit concerned, for instance, that the European Parliament itself hasn't got an account on Blue Sky yet. The president of the Parliament isn't there yet. And I think that that's really necessary if you want to create a true, vibrant community where all the relevant views are put forward. But many journalists are now on the platform. That's really essential because you need that interaction with journalists and between journalists and policymakers for it to be a success. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but it will take some more work to really have it replace X as the main platform for debate in Brussels.
Yeah, I think the journalist community has been kind of one of the first ones to go there and start using it, because I think they were relying on other journalists, and that seems to have created the first community within the community. With the institutions, I don't think there's a policy yet, but recently, or a few weeks ago, the Ursula von der Leyen team, let's assume it's probably not her spending her time on Blue Sky, has reclaimed her account, which John Worth, a high-profile opponent of X, who had been switching to all the alternatives, had actually been holding on to the account for her. And so there was that moment of exchange. And as you said, there's quite a few MEPs, but not the same amount that we see on X. I mean, we still see that there's nearly 95% of MEPs on X and lower number on Blue Sky. So that's happening. What do you think it would take for it to become a default place in the Brussels space? And I want to compare that to Mastodon, because I think when Mastodon was introduced, the intention was the same, but it just didn't gain that traction. And just one more point, I've in terms of engagement, I believe a lot of people have observed exactly what you said, which is smaller follower base, much higher levels of engagement compared to X. So I think that's a key criteria. So do you think, how does it not become the next Mastodon?
I think it's already moved way beyond Mastodon in terms of where we are at the moment. And, I think moving from one platform to the other is often quite painful. And that's one of the reasons why people aren't leaving X, because they've got tens or hundreds of thousands of followers and they don't want to lose those in the process of migrating. And many people have been happily surprised that actually they've been building up those follower numbers as easily, or if not more easily, on Blue Sky than on X. But it's clearly something that people care about, especially if this is important to your professional work and for instance your professional marketing. I think Blue Sky is still very much an Anglosphere platform at the moment. English is the dominant language. I think the company itself will have to invest more in Europe and making sure that it becomes a presence not only in the English language countries but also in countries like Germany and France, so that it becomes relevant from a domestic point of view as well. And of course, people in Brussels, especially MEPs, are also looking to their home audiences. And so if they see their voters engaging on the platform, then there's an incentive for them to do so as well. But yes, indeed. And I think, you mentioned John Worth. He was an early adopter of Twitter. He's done a great job also being an early adopter of Blue Sky and promoting it in Brussels. And I think that as long as people like him keep working to spread the message and encourage people to join, then we're in a pretty good place.
Yeah, I think when we had the EU influencer event in September, it still looked like X was really extremely resilient and dominant. Now I think we're seeing this kind of shift happening in a small part of the community, but it's still too early to tell where it's going to land. But I want to come to kind of maybe a question about ethics, and obviously you've been working on Transparency International, EU, so you have some interesting insights on this. Now, in the 2016 election, everybody was saying, we don't want social channels to be politicized. We want them to represent a broad range of views, and that was especially a kind of right-wing narrative against Facebook, Meta in general, and Twitter. This has completely disappeared after X has so clearly become a political tool. And so now we have, X being a very specific tool with a very specific point of view politically. Then we have TikTok with, you could argue a political agenda, and we've seen that play out in Romania. And Threads that is kind of trying not to be political, which in itself is becoming a political statement. Do you think we're going to see, social channels just becoming part of your political identity? So where you spend your time is an expression of your political beliefs? Or do you think that we can still have a more neutral platform?
I think those two are very difficult to combine, and I think just in the way before social media, and to some extent still today, of course, people, for instance, read a newspaper that aligns with their political views, and they read it because they want to read news brought in a certain way from a certain angle, factually correct and properly analyzed, but from a perspective that they feel comfortable with. And so I think this whole echo chamber thing has always been a bit overblown. I mean, I think that on Blue Sky, just as on pre-Musk Twitter, there have been sensible voices from center left to center right, even left to right, taking part in the debate. The problem has always been not left versus right, but the extremes coming on, particularly the extreme right, seeking to hijack discussion, and as they always do, wanting free speech for themselves, but wanting to deny it to others. And an environment in which there is harassment, in which there is violence, verbal violence that can lead to physical violence, is not a safe space. Most people don't want to be there, and so any platform that promotes that kind of content is going to be abandoned. And so, yes, let's have, a platform must have a right to political views, or it's not interesting to anyone. But we can also ask for a platform that is based on normal forms of human interaction of the kind that we're used to in our real daily lives.
Yeah, I mean, people who don't like Blue Sky, I just had a comment on LinkedIn because I posted the metaphor that Blue Sky could be the same as the Greek story of Zeus, basically taking revenge on its creator, Cronus. So Blue Sky is the creation of Twitter, something not everybody knows, and is obviously challenging its creator. And somebody was saying, yeah, but Blue Sky is basically the soft progressives, and on X you get real conversations, which I thought was kind of a bit silly in the sense that, look, if you're interested in conversations, I think you can explore both spaces. I feel that on X, there's a lot of just a quality deterioration, which is kind of unrelated to politics, which is just you get so much stuff that you don't really understand why it's being thrown at you. which, by the way, I think was an experience people could also have on Twitter. It's not that Twitter was always easy and straightforward. You had trolls and bots and bullies, even before Musk got involved. Do you think that that Blue Sky is going to, because of its structure, aside from the political views of the people who run it, but do you think that the underlying nature of the platform, and maybe we can explain a little bit about this, the open structure that Blue Sky is built on and its ambition, do you think that could protect it from being too politicized or taken over? What are your thoughts on open social?
Well, I'm not a technical expert, but the way Blue Sky has been built has basically been designed to be decentralized and to allow anyone to basically build apps off its protocol. But it's also got a number of tools built in that make it easier, for instance, to block people and to share lists of blocked people with other users. It also makes it easier, for instance, to stop people from quote tweeting you and dunking on you, dunk tweeting, because you can remove your original post from the repost that someone does. And so with those kind of tools, it's much easier for users to create a safe environment for themselves, and it takes the fun or the excitement or the incentive out of bullying or other forms of misbehavior for people who are so inclined. So there's a number of tools that make it a more comfortable space. Having said that, any successful large social media company will have to invest heavily in moderation, will have to invest heavily in making sure they stick with the rules, comply, for instance, in the European case with the Digital Services Act. And if that kind of investment isn't made by the company, then it's also going to run into trouble at some point. And so it'd be interesting to see whether Blue Sky, will start doing that. They've said they're going to moderate and they're going to create a safe environment, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And so we'll need to see, when they've got all these millions of users that they have now, whether they're really capable and willing, capable of doing that and willing to do that.
Yeah, and we've seen, how social platforms can be influenced either overtly, like in the US campaign, or less clearly, as the case of TikTok in Romania. So I think the fact that in Romania they canceled the outcome of an election because of interference is really a first. So I'm curious, do you think, from your expertise and your understanding of democracy, do you think this is a good thing? And could it happen again? I mean, I presume that this is not the first and not the last time that certain players, Russia and China included, try to influence an election. Do you think we're going to see more cancelled elections or cancelled platforms going forward?
Well, absolutely, very, very interesting development in Romania. I mean, of course, I hope we don't get to see more cancelled elections. The Digital Services Act and the regulation on political advertising that's coming into effect fully next year, and other legislation is designed to make sure elections are conducted in a fair and transparent manner, and so there's no need then to question the outcome. And on the Romanian case, look, there are those who say that the election was cancelled, that it was right to cancel the election, but it was done for the wrong reasons by the Constitutional Court. But what's certain is that on prima facie evidence, what we've heard, there was this massive influence campaign. It looks like TikTok may not have adhered to its obligations, and so it's a wake-up call. And I think it's very good that both Romania and the European Commission have now signaled that this is unacceptable. And that we need to get to the bottom of this with a view to making sure that there isn't this possibility in the future. Social media is now incredibly important in political elections. We've seen the same in the US as well, where Musk is now closely allied to Trump. He's jokingly being referred to as President Musk now to VP Trump. If social media take on that kind of role in an election, they must be regulated, because otherwise we're going to end up in a situation where very rich billionaires, maybe even a trillionaire, determine who gets selected where, and that's not a situation we want to be in. So it's a really important wake-up call. We're very lucky that the DSA was adopted in the last parliament, but now it needs to be fully implemented and enforced.
Right, and one of the things that you like to focus on is scrutiny of institutions. You've been talking about the election of the new ombudsman on Blue Sky. So tell us a little bit about why this matters and why you wanted to focus people's attention on this.
Yeah, I mean, as I discovered, this is a bit of a niche topic, even for Blue Sky. So I've been following the ombudsman election because the EU ombudsman plays a really important role in basically keeping the EU institutions to account and making sure they deliver for Europe's citizens. And we've just had a very active European ombudsman, Emily O'Reilly, who was never afraid to hold the Commission and the Parliament in particular to account and to call them out on any issues concerning the administration, concerning integrity, and for instance, working on things like access to documents, making sure the citizens have access to the information they need to follow the legislative process. And things on that front have not been getting better in recent years. And Emily O'Reilly has rightly called the institutions out on that. And so the election of a new ombudsman was very important in terms of where things are going to go in the next 5 years. And the Parliament just elected Teresa Anjinho from Portugal to the role. During the hearings in the European Parliament, in the Petitions Committee, she made it clear between the lines that she was not going to be as activist as O'Reilly and that she would take a more cautious diplomatic approach to the role. And I think that would be a pity, because I think that it's important to have strong watchdogs in Brussels who hold the institutions' feet to the fire. We've seen the Pfizer scandal at the European Parliament about the missing WhatsApp messages. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that needs to be that needs to come to light, and that needs to be investigated if the Commission or other institutions don't come clean on that kind of thing. So that's why it was very important. I live skeeted it on Blue Sky, the hearings in the European Parliament. But you can tell this is one of the areas where there's just very little interest in such a topic still on the Blue Sky. That's not there yet in terms of audience numbers.
Right. And I mean, after the election we had in the EU and in the US, I think it's fair to say things have become more polarized. People also say that part of this is because of social media, which encourages people to be more extreme, more emotional. What are your kind of hopes and fears for 2025? Are we entering into a are we entering into a space where effectively things are going to get much more polarized, and where social media is going to make the political discussion worse? Or are you optimistic that people, especially in the EU, can perhaps stay true to their values and have a more constructive engagement going forward?
Well, I think on the whole, yes, things are getting more polarized. I'm on the board of an organization called Lie Detectors, which organizes classroom visits and teacher training by professional journalists to help school children and their teachers understand how to detect fake news online, but also how to deal with polarized content online. And absolutely, if you look at the Romanian election, a lot of that content was highly polarized. The same is true in the US. We've seen it in other elections as well. I think some of the measures that are put in place, regulatory measures, will help address that, because a lot of the polarization is due to the spread of disinformation or the spread of hateful, racist, etc. comment, and those issues need to be tackled by the social media companies, and that's why we have the DSA. So I think the regulatory environment is now better, but clearly we're not in a position yet where things are getting better. I think they're still getting worse.
So you speak to young people and students about some of these issues. When you meet people who ask you, what do you think matters the most if you want to start working in Brussels, in the EU, perhaps in communication, what is your advice to young people in 2025?
I mean, my first bit of advice would always be follow your heart. And I know that's not an easy bit of advice to follow, because obviously in the end you need a job. And if you're offered a job and you don't get the one that you have been hoping for, but you have an alternative that's not as fun or not as interesting as the one you're hoping for, you may have to take it. But I think it's always a good idea to keep following your interest and your heart, and to make sure that you're working on something that you really enjoy. I think the second thing I would say is communications is about skills, and so it's really critical that not only that you build up the basic skills that you need in order to do well in a particular role, because there's always certain rules and certain processes by which things are best done, but also that you keep investing in learning throughout your career. I mean, if you're looking at what's happening now with all social media developments, when I started my career, there were no social media, there was barely the internet. So things have changed considerably, and you need to make sure that you adapt and stay on top of things to remain competitive. And the third thing I would say is that that it's really important to use humor and to stay lighthearted, not take yourself too seriously, because then you kind of get lost in what you do, and you may be less effective at your job as well. I think the best communications always involves an element of humor.
Excellent. Okay, now it's time for our recommendations. Sorry, we have a slight lag with the jingle. What are your recommendations for our listeners?
So my biggest discovery the last few months was this series on France TV called Parlement, which is a series set in the European Parliament. It's there's 3 series out there now. It's streaming on France TV, but also on a host of other platforms in different countries. So I'm sure you can find it. And it's this basically, I would describe it as kind of a West Wing for Brussels. So West Wing for the younger audience members, the political show set in the White House with Martin Sheen, which basically was a bit like, mimicking the Clinton White House political operation. And Parlement, I think, really is very good at showing you exactly how the European Parliament specifically, but also the EU institutions work, with a great cast, fantastic script, and really a lot of humor. And you can save a lot of money on a university course on the European Parliament just by watching that series. The second thing I would recommend is Who's Watching Brussels by Lise Witteman, who's the head of the Brussels Bureau of Follow the Money, the investigative news website. It's a great dive into a number of the scandals that have hit Brussels in the last years, and what hasn't been learned from them, what should be learned from them. And finally, I would recommend Churchill at War on Netflix, which is a great docudrama about Churchill, his rise to political power, and how he won the Second World War. A lot of emphasis on his friendship with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in that, which I found really fascinating, but also such huge parallels to where we are today. The interbellum, where nobody thinks war is realistic, and Churchill's kind of the only one going, guys, we've got to get ready, because Hitler's coming, the war's going to start. And I don't want to end on too depressing a note, but I don't think we're in a position right now where we can lean back and assume that everything's going to be okay. So
2025, potentially an interesting year, or a potentially catastrophic one. My recommendation of the week is a movie on Netflix, which is actually pretty terrible. It's called Afraid, and the AI of Afraid is for the word AI. And it's basically, I heard about it on the podcast from Hard Fork, which, by the way, Casey Newton, who does this podcast, is also on Blue Sky. and he was asking about the EU institutions. So I actually sent him, well, I tweeted, skeeted, or whatever you do, the lists of the various MEP, because he was saying, is there anyone in the EU who's active on Blue Sky? And because he couldn't really find where they were. So very interesting. Anyway, the Hardford podcast has a whole conversation about Sydney, which is an early version of ChatGPT, where the AI went crazy and essentially wanted to marry the person who she was speaking to, and it was basically the code without guardrails. So this is what happens if you have an unfiltered AI. It's quite scary. Anyway, the movie presents all the tropes that you could have, all the things that you should be afraid of in AI. But so it's fun to watch because it kind of it's literally a shopping list of online harassment, bullying, the dangers of AI dominating your life, and of course wanting to take over the world, which we've known since HAL, the computer in 2001 Space Odyssey. It was clearly back and ready to take over the world. So a bit of fun. I mean, I would not recommend it from a cinematic point of view, but if you're in the AI space, it's certainly very entertaining. So that is all we have time for. But next week there will be next week will be the celebrations. So Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, have a fantastic time, and we will see you online and particularly on Blue Sky. So thank you, Michiel. Have a great weekend.
My pleasure.
Thank you.